I recently met a friend in Seoul, Minjin, who was treating me to a surprisingly expensive dinner. He was beaming, showing me a sonogram on his phone with the kind of pride you'd expect from a first-time father. But when I started with the usual congratulations, he cut me off with a dry, knowing smirk. "Don't get too sentimental," he said, swiping away the image to reveal a banking app. He didn't talk about names or nurseries. He talked about the newborn special loan. To him, that tiny heartbeat on the screen wasn't just a child. It was a 100 million won low-interest lever that would finally allow him to escape his 10-square-meter studio. He wasn't participating in a miracle. He was executing a trade. It was a perfect, if chilling, illustration of what's happening across East Asia. We've been told for years that these nations are dying, but looking at Minjun, it felt more like they were being redesigned. A few days later, I was in Tokyo, watching a technician install a small, inconspicuous white plastic box in the corner of a studio apartment. It wasn't a smoke detector or a security camera. It was an AI-powered anomaly sensor designed to monitor the stillness of the elderly man living inside. The technician explained it with a detached, professional efficiency. The goal isn't necessarily to save a life, but to ensure that when the resident eventually dies alone, the body is discovered within 24 hours. Why? To prevent the stigma of a lonely death from devaluing the real estate for the next tenant. In Korea, life is being incentivized as a form of financial arbitrage. In Japan, death is being managed as a line item in a fiscal risk report. This isn't a simple demographic crisis anymore. It's the birth of a new, post-biological social contract, a world where the state has stopped trying to fix the human heart and has started focused on balancing the ledger of a civilization that has quietly decided to stop renewing itself. You know, that moment with Minjun when he just swiped from the sonogram to the banking app? It really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Because we always frame these demographic stories, you know, low birth rates, aging populations, as this immense tragedy. It's a kind of sad, slow motion movie.
Right, a story of decay.
Exactly. But standing there in that restaurant in Seoul, and then a few days later in that quiet apartment in Tokyo, it didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt, I don't know, it felt like engineering. It felt like a machine trying to reoptimize itself.
Oh, it feels like engineering because that is precisely what it is. I think we've moved past the crisis management phase into something totally different.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
If you look at the new data coming out of Seoul and Tokyo right now, and remember, we're talking January 2026, so this is the freshest information we have, what we are seeing isn't a government trying to, save the family in the traditional sense. We are seeing the deployment of what I've started calling a biosolitical patch.
Biosolitical patch. Okay, you have to stop me right there.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly academic. Are we talking about a government policy, or are we talking about something out of a sci-fi novel?
It does sound a little abstract, I get it. Okay. Imagine you're driving a car 100 miles an hour and you get a flat tire.
Okay.
You can't stop the car. You absolutely cannot stop. So what do? You don't try to change the tire. You just slap a patch on the hole to keep it from blowing out completely, just to get you another 10, 20 miles down the road.
You're just trying to keep the vehicle moving.
Exactly. South Korea and Japan are in what you could call a biosocial stalemate. The traditional engine of population growth, people falling in love, getting married, having kids because it's a natural human impulse, that engine has stalled. The numbers are critically low.
I mean, catastrophically low.
Right. So instead of a radical social overhaul, like opening the doors to mass immigration, which is politically impossible for them.
A non-starter.
Or, completely redesigning the hyper-competitive work culture, which is economically impossible. They are using finance and technology to just patch the system. They're patching the tire.
So, to go back to my friend Minjin, his baby isn't really a baby in this model. It's the patch on the tire.
From the perspective of the state's balance sheet, yes, absolutely. That baby is a mechanism to keep the real estate market liquid and functioning. And that sensor in the Tokyo apartment, it's a mechanism to protect property asset values. It's not about human sentiment anymore. It's all about system maintenance.
That is just an incredibly bleak way to look at the world.
Yeah.
But I have to say, Minjin wasn't bleak. He was genuinely thrilled. He felt like he'd cracked the code, like he'd won. And he kept using this one word over and over. Leverage. He said the baby was leverage.
And he's 100% right. To understand his excitement, you have to stop thinking of the newborn special loan as a form of welfare and start seeing it as a financial arbitrage trade.
Arbitrage. Okay, I usually think of that in stock trading. You're buying a stock on one exchange and selling it on another to profit from a tiny price difference. How does that possibly apply to having a kid?
Let's actually do the math on this, because this is where it stops looking like a family-friendly perk and starts looking like a cold, hard financial instrument.
Okay, lay it out for me.
So, you're Minjun, you're in your early 30s, you live in Seoul. The number one goal for anyone in your position is to buy an apartment because in Korea, real estate isn't just a home. It's the primary, maybe the only path to middle-class stability.
Right, it's the main asset class.
A decent, not even luxurious, but a decent apartment is going to cost, let's say, 900 million won.
Which is roughly, what? Somewhere around 700,000 US dollars?
Give or take, depending on the exchange rate. Now, in the high interest rate environment we've had for the last couple of years, if you go to a normal commercial bank for a mortgage, you're going to get a rate of, 5%? Maybe 6%.
Yeah, that sounds about right for a standard loan.
So let's say you need to borrow 500 million won of that. At 5%, your monthly interest payment, not the principal, just the interest, is about 2.1 million.
Wow. Okay, so that's like $1,600 a month. Just interest. It's just money you're lighting on fire.
It's gone. For most young couples, that's completely unaffordable. It's a non-starter. But then the government comes along with this program, the Newborn Special Loan. The condition is simple. You have a child, you register a birth, and if you do, you suddenly qualify for a loan with an interest rate as low as 1.6%, fixed for 5 years.
Wait, 1.6%. In an economy where this standard rate is 5 or 6, that's practically free money.
It is free money. It's a massive subsidy. So let's run that calculation again. On that same 500 million won loan, but at 1.6%, your monthly interest payment drops to around 660,000.
You go from paying 2.1 million won a month to 660,000 won. You're saving almost 1.5 million won every single month.
Yeah.
That's over 1,000 US dollars a month that's suddenly back in your pocket. And the only thing you did differently was produce a birth certificate.
That's the trade. And if you calculate that savings over the 5-year fixed period, it's a direct cash subsidy from the government of roughly 90 million won. The baby is, in a very real sense, paying the mortgage.
So the baby becomes a financial instrument.
But that's not even the real arbitrage. The real trade is that this loan gives you access to an asset, the apartment itself, that was previously completely unattainable. You are trading the biological act of having a child for immediate entry into the asset class that defines your entire economic future in Seoul.
So when Minjin told me, don't get sentimental, what he really meant was, don't look at the future cost of diapers and education, look at the immediate capital gains on the real estate.
He is hedging his entire life. Of course, he knows raising a kid is expensive, the education costs, the food, the clothes. It's a huge financial drain. But he's made a calculation. He's betting that the appreciation on his Seoul apartment, plus the massive interest savings, will outweigh the cost of raising the child, at least for the first 5 or 10 years. It's a venture capital project, and the baby is the seed funding.
This is wild. But is this just helping people who were probably going to have kids anyway, just making it a bit easier? Or is it actually changing behavior? Because I heard this story, a separate one, about a young couple in Seoul in one of those super dense neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
They were in their 30s and they're, dead set on what they called a reproductive strike. It's a whole topic we need to get into.
Mm-hmm.
But they basically ran the numbers on this loan and they pivoted. It wasn't a biological urge to be parents. It was a financial urge to be homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
The baby was the collateral needed to get the loan.
And that right there is the crucial tectonic shift we're seeing. It's the financialization of birth. Children are being conceived not primarily as an act of love or family creation, but as a condition for accessing credit.
A means to an end.
A means to a financial end.
Yeah.
And to get to your question about who this really helps, this is where the whole thing gets very controversial. The government markets this as a low birth rate support measure, which makes you think it's for struggling young families.
Yeah, you'd think it's for the people who can't afford rent.
But the data tells a completely different story. The people who are struggling to buy groceries are not the ones applying for a $500,000 mortgage, even at 1.6%.
So who's actually taking these loans?
The National Assembly Budget Office just released a breakdown of the applicants. It's stunning. 51% of the households applying had an annual income over 80 million won.
51%. So more than half are already solidly middle or upper middle class.
And it gets better. 23%, nearly a quarter of all applicants earn over 100 million won a year.
So almost a quarter of the people using this support measure are making six-figure incomes in a country where the median salary is much, much lower than that.
And the government knows this. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance has publicly admitted that the loan is becoming a high-income product. In fact, their response wasn't to target it better to the poor. Their response was to raise the income cap to allow couples earning up to 200 million won a year to apply.
So they doubled down. They're not even pretending it's for the poor anymore.
They're not trying to alleviate poverty. They're trying to secure the asset values and the lifestyle of the existing middle and upper classes. It is, and I'll use the term again, sovereign demographic risk hedging. The state is worried about a collapse in the real estate market if the next generation can't afford to buy in. So they're subsidizing the people most likely to buy to keep the whole pyramid scheme going.
This sounds very different from things like social impact bonds, right? I remember reading about those in the UK and the US, where, private investors fund a social program, like reducing reoffending rates for prisoners.
Right.
And the government pays them back with a profit, but only if the program achieves a measurable social good.
SIBs are the closest comparison, but you've hit on the key difference. In a normal social impact bond, the payout from the government is tied to a specific positive social outcome. Did the former prisoners stay out of jail? Did the at-risk student graduate high school?
So there's a performance metric.
A social performance metric. Here, with the newborn loan, the only outcome required is the biological event, the birth. But the payout isn't a social program for the child. The payout is purely financial leverage for the parents. The government isn't paying for better daycare or schools directly. They're subsidizing the parents' investment portfolio. It's a much more direct, much more cynical, purely transactional contract.
It's basically a bribe, a very well-structured bribe. Give us one future taxpayer, and in return, we will give you a cheap mortgage to secure your position in the middle class.
And the truly wild part is it's working. On paper, at least. The January 2026 data from Statistics Korea just came out, and Seoul's fertility rate, which has been in free fall for a decade, ticked up to 0.79.
Okay, 0.79 is still apocalyptic. I mean, replacement rate is 2.1.
It's apocalyptic, yes. But here's the headline number. That came with a 6.2% increase in the number of newborns in 2025. After years of decline, a 6% jump in a single year is a massive spike.
So the bribe worked. People are taking the deal.
People are absolutely taking the deal. But most sociologists looking at this are calling it a tactical pause in the overall decline. It's not that people suddenly feel hopeful about the future of Korea. It's not that the underlying pressures of the education system or the work culture have vanished.
No, the fundamentals are the same.
The fundamentals are identical. It's just that the financial incentive finally became so overwhelmingly good that it crossed a threshold. It became a rational economic decision to have a child. Minjin didn't have a baby because he believes the world is getting better. He had a baby because the loan terms were just too good to refuse.
And that distinction is everything. It's a transaction, not a societal transformation. It's a patch.
It's the patch.
Okay, so if Seoul is financializing birth, turning it into a trade, Japan seems to be going in the other direction. They're industrializing death, turning it into a logistics problem. I want to go back to that little white box I saw the technician installing in Tokyo.
The anomaly sensor.
The anomaly sensor.
Yeah.
He was so matter-of-fact about it. He's drilling it into the corner of this tiny studio apartment where an elderly man lives alone.
Okay.
And he said, this detects stillness. And I asked him, you mean like if he falls down? And he just shook his head and said, no, if he stops moving entirely for 12 hours. And then he said the thing that explained everything. He said the landlord required it because he couldn't risk another Jiko Bukin.
Jiko Bukin. That is the single most feared phrase in the Japanese real estate market. It's a ghost that haunts every landlord.
So explain that to me, because I think for a listener in, say, North America or Europe, if someone passes away in a house, it's sad, maybe a little creepy, but it's not an economic catastrophe. You clean the carpets, maybe you repaint, you move on. But in Japan, it seems like it's a permanent stain that destroys the value of the property.
It does. Jiko Bukin translates to something like accident property or stigmatized property, and it legally refers to any property where an unnatural death has occurred. That could be a suicide or a murder, but the one that's becoming increasingly common is the Kodokushi, the lonely death.
Where someone dies alone and their body isn't discovered for days or weeks.
Or even months. And there's a website for this, isn't there? I think you mentioned hearing about a map.
Yeah, I'd heard it spoken about like some kind of urban legend, this map of death.
It's not a legend. It's very real. It's a website called Oshima Land. And if you go to it, it just looks like a normal Google map of Japan, but it's covered in these thousands of little red fire icons.
And each fire icon is a death.
Each one is a reported Jiko Bukin. You click on the icon over an apartment building and a little box pops up with the details. Apartment 203, male, 40s, hanging suicide, May 2024. Or apartment 501, female, 80s, body discovered after 3 weeks due to smell, August 2025.
My God. It's a public, crowdsourced ledger of death. That is unbelievably grim.
It is grim, and it's terrifyingly comprehensive. And because this information is public and easily accessible, tenants and buyers check it religiously before they'll even consider a property, and the economic impact is just brutal.
So what does it actually do to the price?
There's academic research on this. A single Jiko Bukin incident in one apartment doesn't just affect that one unit, it creates a spillover effect. It can depress the property values and the rents for the entire building by about 5%.
The whole building takes a hit.
And for the specific apartment where the death occurred, forget about it. You might have to slash the rent by 30, 50, even 70% just to get anyone, to live there. So you can see the problem from the landlord's perspective.
Yeah. If I'm a landlord and I have, say, a building with 50 units and 10 of them are occupied by elderly people living alone, each one of those tenants is a walking financial time bomb.
A huge liability. If they pass away peacefully and their family finds them the same day, it's a tragedy, but it's not a financial event. But if they die and no one finds them for 2 weeks,
then the decomposition starts, the smell.
And that's the trigger. The body begins to decompose. It causes damage to the apartment that requires what's legally known as special cleaning. That's the technical term for biohazard remediation. And the moment you have to hire a special cleaning crew, it becomes a Jiko Bukin event, and you are now legally obligated to disclose the death to the next tenant and probably the one after that. That disclosure is what evaporates your asset value overnight.
Okay, so the state sees this massive systemic risk to the real estate market, which is a pillar of their economy. So they step in to fix it, but they don't fix it by, building more community centers or funding programs to check on the elderly.
Of course not. That's the hard way.
They fix it by changing the disclosure laws. They just change the definition of what you have to tell people.
This is the Japanese biopolitical patch. In October of 2021, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, the MLIT, issued a new set of guidelines for real estate brokers. And in these guidelines, they created a gigantic loophole.
What's the loophole?
They officially ruled that natural deaths, so dying of old age or a chronic illness, and this is the crucial phrase, accidental deaths from everyday life, do not need to be disclosed to the next tenant.
Accidental deaths from everyday life. What on earth does that cover? That sounds incredibly broad.
It covers all the most common ways elderly people die alone. Tripping and hitting your head. Choking on mochi, which is a notorious issue in Japan. Slipping and drowning in the bathtub. Having a heart attack or a stroke. Under these new rules, if your tenant dies of a heart attack in their living room, you do not have to tell the next person who rents the apartment. Unless.
There's always an unless.
There's always an unless. The exemption only applies if the death is clean. If the body isn't found quickly and it remains undiscovered long enough to cause odor or pest infestation that requires special cleaning, then the disclosure obligation kicks right back in.
And there it is. That's the entire business case for the little white box, the sensor. The sensor isn't a healthcare device. It's not primarily there to call an ambulance and save the man's life. It's there to start a stopwatch the moment his heart stops beating.
It is an asset protection device, plain and simple. Its function is to ensure that the time between death and discovery is short enough that the death remains natural and accidental under the MLIT guidelines. If that sensor alerts the landlord or the management company within 12 or 24 hours, they can get to the apartment, have the body removed, and air out the room before decomposition becomes a special cleaning event.
No smell, no stain, no disclosure. The property value is preserved.
The ledger is balanced.
That is just. It's profoundly cynical. It's like just-in-time inventory management, but for human corpses.
It is the complete industrialization of solitude. And you have to understand, this isn't happening in a vacuum. Japan is facing a demographic cliff. They have a massive labor shortage. They don't have enough young people to work as caregivers or even just to be neighbors who check in on the elderly women down the hall. So they're building this enormous age tech sector to fill that human gap with technology.
I've seen some of this stuff online. The robots, right? There's one called Palro.
Palro is the most famous one. It's made by Fujisoft. It's this little humanoid robot about 1.5 feet tall. It stands on a table in a nursing home common room. It has big, friendly eyes, and it leads the residents in their daily exercise routines.
Seriously, a robot leads exercises.
I've seen the videos. You have a room full of people in their 80s and 90s, all following the movements of this little plastic robot, lifting their arms when it tells them to lift their arms. It sings songs from their youth. It tells pre-programmed jokes.
Do people actually engage with it?
They do. They talk to it. They pat its head. Because for many of them, who else is there to talk to? The human staff are stretched impossibly thin, and the technology is getting more and more sophisticated.
In what ways?
You have companies like Sumpo, a huge insurance firm. They have a future care lab developing things like AI-powered wheelchairs that navigate hallways autonomously, so you don't need a nurse to push you to the dining hall. There's another company, Silverwood Corp, that uses VR headsets to simulate the experience of dementia for the few human caregivers they have left, so they can learn empathy more efficiently.
It's all about efficiency. I mean, you can't deny that it's an efficient solution to a labor problem. But it feels like we're systematically replacing the organic, messy connections of a human society, family, neighbors, community, with this clean, sterile, digital scaffolding.
That is the patch. The organic social fabric has torn. The demographic numbers prove it's torn. So they're not trying to reweave it, they're just stapling it back together with algorithms and sensors. In Korea, the patch is a financial product, the loan. In Japan, the catch is a piece of technology, the sensor. But they're both desperate, ingenious attempts to manage the same core problem. People have stopped reproducing, and the population is aging into obsolescence.
Which brings us to the absolute heart of the issue, doesn't it? We've talked about the patches, these financial and technological fixes, but we haven't really talked about the wound they're trying to cover. Why is all this happening in the first place? Why was Min-Jen so transactional about his own child? Why did that couple in Seoul need a multi-million-won bribe to even consider having a kid? You call this the reproductive strike.
Yes, and I think it's really important to be precise with that term. When we hear the word strike, we think of factory workers walking off the job to demand better pay. This is something deeper. This is an entire generation or two quietly refusing to perform the biological labor of reproduction because the system has made it an unbearable, irrational burden.
I want to try and put myself in the shoes of someone in that position. Imagine you're this brilliant graduate student, maybe at a university in Incheon. You're 26, 27 years old. You're in this beautiful modern library, high up in a skyscraper, and you're literally looking at a spreadsheet of your own future. And, with absolute certainty that in this hyper-competitive system, a child is not a joy or a blessing. A child is a liability. A child is a multi-decade, high-cost project that will drain the human capital that you have spent your entire life since you were 5 years old maximizing. Your refusal to have a baby isn't because you hate kids. It's the only real leverage you have. It's the only way you can say no to this relentless bureaucratic machine that demands 110% of your productive energy for your entire life.
That graduate student is the perfect protagonist for this story because she is trapped in that biosocial stalemate we talked about. And to really understand her decision, you have to look at the two immense forces that are crushing her simultaneously.
Okay, what are they?
On one side, you have what Koreans call education hell, the hagwon culture.
Can you explain hagwon for people who might not be familiar? Because I think in the West, we hear tutoring and we think of something you do for an hour a week if you're, failing algebra.
Right. In Korea, hagwon is not remedial. It is the mandatory parallel education system that is essential for survival. We're talking about the vast network of private after-school cram schools. A typical middle-class kid goes to their regular school from, say, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Then they go to a hagwon until 10 p.m., maybe 11 p.m.
Every night.
Every night, and on weekends. And the cost is astronomical. If you're a parent, the cost of a child isn't just food and clothing, it's English academy, math academy, piano lessons, coding camp. Because if you don't pay for it, your child will fall behind. And in a society that's competitive, falling behind doesn't just mean getting a bad grade. It means falling out of the middle class entirely.
So the real cost of a child isn't can I feed them, it's can I afford to keep them competitive in this brutal meritocracy.
That's the calculation. So our graduate student in Incheon, she sees that crushing financial burden, and then she looks at her physical environment. You mentioned the 10 square meter living capsule.
The Goshi one rooms, yeah.
Right.
Or just the standard tiny studio apartments.
Right. The architecture of the modern East Asian megacity is actively anti-family. When you live in a space that's 10, maybe 15 square meters, you physically cannot start a family. There's no space for a crib, let alone a toddler. The city itself has been optimized for the solitary, efficient worker, not for the family unit. I call this physical compression.
So you have the physical compression of the tiny apartment, and you also have what you've called atmospheric sovereignty, the overwhelming social and economic pressure.
And this leads to what I think is the core conflict. It's a clash of software and hardware.
What do you mean by that?
East Asian society is still running on a very old operating system. Let's call it Confucian software. The cultural code says, you have a duty to your parents. You must continue the family line. You must sacrifice your individual desires for the good of the group. For women especially, your primary role is to be a wife and mother.
Okay, so that's the software. But the hardware it's running on?
The hardware, the economic and physical reality, is pure, ruthless, hyper-capitalist neoliberalism. The hardware demands: work 80 hours a week, be geographically mobile, do not have dependents that slow you down, maximize your personal productivity and efficiency at all costs.
So the student in Incheon is trying to run the old Confucian family software on this new, brutal, neoliberal hardware.
And the system is crashing, it's incompatible, the reproductive strike is the error message, it's the blue screen of death for the old demographic model. That student realizes she cannot possibly satisfy both masters. She cannot be the perfect voted Confucian mother and the perfect efficient neoliberal worker. It's impossible. So she makes the only rational choice available to her. She chooses herself. She chooses the strike.
Okay, so the government sees this. They see the system crashing. They know they can't change the hardware. They're not going to dismantle their hyper-competitive global economy. And they can't just delete the software. That Confucian culture is thousands of years old.
Yeah.
So what's their move?
Their move is to automate the state itself. If you can't rely on humans to perform their civic and biological duties, you build a digital system that can run the country with fewer and fewer of them.
You replace people with code.
Exactly. I was just looking at the 20th World Digital Government Rankings published by Waseda University in Japan. This is fresh 2025 data, and guess who's at the very top of the list year after year?
Let me guess. South Korea and Japan.
Number 1 and number 2, consistently. South Korea is all in on building what they call a digital platform government. They are obsessed with making the interface between the citizen and the state completely frictionless. You need a tax refund. It's a single click on an app. You want to register a new business. It's done instantly online. You want that newborn special loan that Minjun got. You apply through your phone.
They're trying to engineer trust through efficiency.
They're trying to buy trust through efficiency. The implicit promise is, we know life is hard. We can't promise you happiness or a family, but we can promise you a seamless, fast, digital interface with the bureaucracy.
And Japan is doing the same thing, but more with AI inside the government itself, right?
They have a policy of light touch AI regulation, which is designed to accelerate its adoption. They are aggressively integrating AI to do the work of civil servants drafting official documents, answering citizen queries online, managing vast data sets. And the reason isn't just because it's cool new tech, it's because the human civil servants are retiring in droves and there aren't enough young people to replace them. The AI is a demographic necessity. It's a replacement for the missing workforce.
So the state itself becomes a digital operating system designed to manage a shrinking user base. It's like a server farm that keeps humming along perfectly, the fans spinning, the LEDs blinking, even after all the users have logged off for the last time.
Technology. And that is the essence of the post-biological social contract. The old contract was simple. The state provides security and opportunity, and in return, the people reproduce to sustain the state for the next generation.
A biological contract.
Right. The new post-biological contract is this. The state will efficiently manage the nation's assets, real estate, infrastructure, financial markets, and the people. Well, the people are just temporary occupants of the units on the national ledger. Their biological continuation is no longer a core requirement for the system's stability.
Okay, so let's try and pull this entire sprawling picture together. We started this deep dive with Minjun in Seoul, literally trading this sonogram of his unborn child for a low-interest loan. Then we went to that sterile apartment in Tokyo where a sensor is installed not to save an old man's life, but to protect the landlord's property value from the stigma of a lonely death.
Right.
And we ended with the brilliant, rational student Incheon looking at her spreadsheet and making the calculated decision to go on reproductive strike because she simply cannot afford the price of admission to the meritocratic rat race for her child. What is the single story that connects all of these dots?
The story is that these two incredibly advanced, incredibly successful civilizations have, whether consciously or not, chosen a path of what you could call managed, elegant decline. They are not trying to fix the root causes of loneliness or hyper-competition anymore. That's too hard, too disruptive.
Because fixing those things would require breaking the entire economic system. It would mean a planned crash in real estate prices. It would mean forcing companies to prioritize worker well-being over shareholder returns.
It would mean revolution, and they are not willing to do that. The stability of the system is the paramount goal. So instead, they patch it. They apply these ingenious fixes. They use financial derivatives like the newborn loan to monetize the few births that still occur. They use surveillance technology like the age tech sensors to monitor the process of dying so that it doesn't damage the asset column on the ledger. It's a system that has decided to prioritize systemic stability, keeping the stock market up, keeping real estate prices from collapsing, maintaining a high credit rating over biological vitality.
It's the perfect order. I mean, you can walk down any street in central Tokyo or Seoul in 2026, and it is breathtaking. The streets are spotless, the trains arrive on the second they're scheduled to, the digital government portals work flawlessly, there are helpful robots dancing in the nursing homes. On the surface, it looks like a utopia.
It looks like the most efficient, well-run society in human history. But you open the door to one of those pristine apartment buildings, and behind those doors you find the reproductive strike and the lonely death. The national balance sheet is pristine, the spreadsheet is all green, but the civilization itself is quietly, politely, and very efficiently negotiating its own extinction.
That's the part that's so hard to get your head around. We're conditioned to think of civilizational collapse as something loud and chaotic. We think of riots in the streets, burning buildings, a Mad Max scenario. But this is a silent collapse. It's a collapse by spreadsheet. It's a collapse that has been optimized, managed, and comes with a low-interest loan and a helpful AI assistant.
And honestly, it's a model that I think a lot of other developed nations are watching very, very closely because the specific tools, Minjun's loan, the Tokyo sensor, they might be unique to East Asia for now. But the underlying pressures that created them, the housing crisis, the impossible cost of raising a competitive child, the atomization of society, the aging population, those pressures are global. The patch is coming to a city near you, probably sooner than you think.
It leaves you with this really unsettling question. If social cohesion, public cleanliness, and economic stability can be sustained through a combination of polite fiction and targeted fiscal subsidies, does this represent a form of civilizational competence? Or are we staring at a future where the state has become a highly efficient machine for managing the extinction of its own inventors?